Cool. So just to start off with a quick intro, so my name is Brian. I'm the VP of Product and Design at Namely. I am a huge Excel nerd, very relevant to today's topic. I probably like Excel a little bit more than Rachel likes emojis, possibly a little bit less than Jesse likes typefaces. Just a little bit of my background. I spent most of my career before this in the Bay Area at a couple different startups. So what I'm hoping you guys will get out of this talk is four things. So we're going to go over really quick 3 practical examples about how to be more data-driven in your decision making. Maybe it will motivate some of you guys to learn a new skill, whether it's like Excel, SQL, or anything around data analysis. A newfound appreciation, or hopefully not newfound for everybody, of how awesome Excel is. And it's also a little bit of an argument for why I think startups, especially early stage startups, should really consider using SQL and Excel to do a lot of their data work versus some of the BI in a box solutions that are more popular today. Before we jump in, actually really quick, I'm really curious, of all of you guys in the crowd, how many of you guys are designers? Okay, so vast majority, it is called design driven. Do we have any product managers in the room? Okay, X, okay, so a little bit in the minority here. So maybe for you guys, what you can think about then, as opposed to potentially doing this yourselves, think about, is my product team doing this? Or is this something that I can ask for? Or if they're not willing to be data-driven and you want to be, we are hiring designers at Namely, so I'll get my plug-in at the very top. Cool, so one quick disclaimer, because I do know I have a couple of my colleagues here today. All of the actual numbers and data that I'm about to show have been obfuscated or randomized or changed, so please don't report me to our security team, Audrey. I don't want to show up to work tomorrow and end up in Namely jail. So cool, so there are really 3 examples I'm going to walk you guys through today, and the first one, they really range from sort of very tactical to very strategic. So I'm going to walk you through a real design challenge that we had, and this is the type of work or data or analysis I think can be very effective pretty much day in, day out, week in, week out as a PM or as part of a product development team. So the problem that we were really looking at was, so for those of you who don't know, Namely makes HR, payroll, and benefits software for mid-sized companies. And a lot of these companies really want the data from their payroll system to flow into their accounting system. So for a lot of these companies, 200-300 people, pretty much the biggest thing they spend money on is people, so they want to make sure in their budgeting that they don't run out of money and go out of business. So pretty common ask for a lot of our clients. Of course, inevitably, the people setting up their payroll and their accounting systems are totally different, probably not there anymore. They use different words, so how will the data flow, right? So the approach obviously is like, well, we can use APIs to plug into the accounting systems they use, commonly NetSuite or Intuit, QuickBooks, or a system like that, so that they can map objects from the payroll side. So saying, hey, in payroll, the department is called, ENG, and accounting, it's called engineering or whatever it is. If you map those, then we could use an API to pipe the payroll data into your budget and have it just flow automatically, so you always keep track of sort of where you are financially, and you want to run your business as a responsible person. So we have a room full of designers in here already. So be honest, how many of you have already started trying to design a solution for this in your head? Couple? Okay. So there are a lot of things that you might think about, like, oh, how would I create a system for mapping things in one system to another system? One thing that I think is really helpful in situations like this, and you'll make tons of decisions like this, right? You may be designing something and need to know the lengths of titles or how many people are on a team or anything like that. In this case, I bet it would be really helpful to know that 26% of the companies in our system have only one department. So if you think about the UI for like, how would I create a mapping system if you're only mapping one thing to one other thing, it'd be pretty simple. The 50th percentile, the median company of our clients have 9 departments that they need to map. So then you're thinking, oh, a lot of different things can work. Maybe I put 2 sets of drop downs, or maybe I can even do a drag and drop, or if you're doing something 9 times, like it's, a lot of things are probably okay. You go to the max and you think, oh, it'd probably be really helpful to know when you're designing this system that we have a company, that is a namely client that has 117. So how do I make sure that my design doesn't actually break if somebody has to spend hours potentially going through these two sets of things, right? But you don't want to design only for the extremes either, so it's helpful then, well, 80% of our companies have 15 or fewer, right? So maybe you can just have a bunch of drop downs and, hey, it's just gonna be awful for that one client, but maybe it's their fault for having such a complicated business. So how do you actually do that? This is something that I think a really good data-driven PM should be able to do in about 15 minutes or less. So, and I think that's actually really important because, when you're looking at this stuff, as you're building and developing a product, there will be tons and tons of opportunities to use data to make, design decisions a lot more quickly, a lot more informed. The faster you can do it, the more you're actually gonna do it. Like, if it took over an hour every time to pull data like this, you probably wouldn't stop and interrupt your day, for an hour at a time just to get answers to stuff like this. So, design heavy crowd, how many of you guys have ever written a SQL query or know SQL? Oh, not bad, pretty impressed. So, one big thing that I think is really important for product people at startups if they really want to be data-driven is you have to have access to the data. So if you have access to your actual database, this is a slightly edited version of our query, so I'm not exposing our actual schema or anything like that. But you can see it's not that complicated. You could probably bang something like that in 3 minutes if you're just like, how many departments are there per company? You can really quickly dump that into Excel. It should take you a minute or less, and you literally just take the output of that. It's a bunch of like client IDs in the first column and how many departments they have in the second column. You can see there's a couple tabs in that workbook, but then it's only one more step to use fun and fancy Excel formulas like COUNTIF to really quickly do basically a distribution chart of how many companies have this number of departments. So you can see 26%, about 248 of them have a single department, and then all the way down. So really quick, how many of you guys have used a COUNTIF before? So pretty cool. If you're not sure, you can Google it. There's tons of resources on the internet. And if you have access to the database or you know how to write SQL, it's literally that simple to like do something that could save you, weeks of time if you go down the route of, oh, I designed this really cool interface, and then at the very end, somebody's like, oh, hey, what about that one client that has 30, 50, 117 departments? And you're like, oh no, and at the last minute, you're like trying to like change it up or make sure it doesn't break. So that's how you can use sort of data really day in, day out. There are tons of decisions that you make that can be informed by something like that. But let's say you want to move up a level. So one thing that I think every product team should have, consumer or B2B, whatever it is a product metrics dashboard. So this is a sample daily metrics dashboard from my time at Kabam, which was a mobile gaming company based in San Francisco. And it's really helpful, I think, to just have a set of really key indicators, key metrics that you're looking at every day. Some of them are really obvious. So, we had one column just for how much money do we make that day, and how does that compare to days before? But there will be other like key metrics that you identify where we realized that in our free-to-play game, we really wanted to know how much currency people had spent. So you, just like Clash of Clans or any games like that, you take real money, you convert it to our currency, and then you spend that currency to buy stuff. Knowing sort of the money supply or basically how much actual currency is floating out there turned out to be a really important leading indicator of how much people were going to spend in the future. Being able to do that, so it basically only takes about a day to set that up. So if I can go back. What we did to set that up was, it turns out that you can use Excel, again, pretty much the most awesome thing ever invented. You can connect it directly to your database. So those of you who know how to write SQL or have access to databases, you can see that I literally have in Excel here the query that I would run against that database, and it's just printing out the results in my Excel workbook. So all I have to do every morning when I show up to work is hit refresh. In about a minute or less, all of those numbers update, and then I can get sort of a real-time update on what exactly is going on in my product. And if you do that day in and day out, you start to develop a really good feel for like what's happening, is what I'm doing working. I just did a release and I thought it was going to move these metrics this way. Did it meet my expectations? I think something a lot of teams struggle with, and this is something that we talk about a lot at Namely even, before we built out our full sort of dashboard like this, was I launched something. How should I know how do I know whether I should invest more as a PM into this feature, or should I go build some new feature, right? That might move whatever metrics I'm trying to move. Well, a really good way to know that is to, any new feature you launch, incorporate into your daily metrics dashboard, every day refresh the data and start getting a feel for, are my important metrics changing when I do things? Like, what are the biggest components to moving these metrics, so that I can best prioritize my time and do the things that have the highest impact. So the big advantage of this, especially for like early-ish stage, I would say all the way up through like seed, Series A, of this are, one, it's free. So if you're getting spammed by like Segment or Mode or Heap, or anything like that, to be honest, I don't know how much those things cost. I don't super want to know, and I don't know because I know how to do this. It only takes about a day to get this set up if you have SQL access to the database. So, it's a lot easier than, I'm gonna get Heap or get Pendo, and then I'm gonna get my engineers to like wire all the pages up, and then, they're gonna forget some, and then, it's gonna be like weeks and months before you actually get actionable data. One really big advantage of this actually is that you can then combine data from different databases, which, I don't know, I think a lot of you guys have probably worked at startups before. Who has? So often startups do not have the best technical architectures early on. Namely is a great example of this, where it's a pretty successful company now, but somehow even today, we have two different databases for our users. So that's another thing where it's really hard if you're doing analysis and pulling data out of your databases. You have to run two sets of queries. That's a pain in the butt. How do you like aggregate them? Well, one way you can do that is you can run both sets of queries in the same Excel workbook and then combine the data using Excel. Excel obviously is a great tool for doing calculated fields. So if you want to manipulate data, like get averages, get moving averages, medians, like how many standard deviations off. If you go back into this, you can see we're actually measuring on the bottom the 14-day average of all of our key metrics and what the standard deviation of those metrics is across that 14-day sample. So just at a glance, when my CEO used to ask, hey, the revenue seems a little bit down, be like, it's a little down, but it's still within the 14-day standard deviation, so stop bothering me, I'm gonna go back to work. As opposed to, I don't know, like, I'm gonna look into that for you, right? And I think this is gonna sound a little bit mystical maybe, but I feel like, at least for me, like updating a dashboard like this has been a daily part of my routine for pretty much like the last 6 or 7 years of my PM career. And I really think that it is just a great sort of like way to start your day in terms of, over time, as you look at the numbers day in, day out and get a feel for what they're doing, it can really help you drive a really deep understanding of like what your metrics are, what moves them, and how exactly they're collected. And I think that makes a really big difference in making great decisions. There are some key disadvantages to this system, so it's not totally perfect. These are the disclaimers. So it doesn't totally scale with data, especially if you're doing consumer. In consumer, you'll quickly get millions and millions and millions of users, and then suddenly they're doing too much stuff, and your Excel workbook will explode. It is very hard to share and collaborate with others with this model. So as you get bigger, you'll tend to still need one of those fancy, expensive BI tools for that level of collaboration, but I still advise all my PMs to still have something like this for themselves. The last one, and this is a big one, is it only works in Windows Excel. So if you look around most startups, there are not a lot of Windows machines. I probably have one of the only ones in all of New York. But it does tie you to using a PC, or if you want to pretend like you're one of the cool kids, whatever that means, you can use a MacBook Pro and put Parallels on it or something like that. So only have a few minutes left, so going to jump into the highest level of like, this is how we do strategy, right? Like this is how we figure out like the big fancy stuff. So one of the things you can also do then with your data is to do both. I think this is one of the most powerful ways, I think, to like figure out what to do on a strategy level. And that's basically combining what I think of as like customer segmentation with behavioral data so that you can basically slice your user base up into different chunks and then see what they're doing. So this is from my time at Mattermark, a startup in San Francisco that sold a data product to both investors, VCs, to help them better research startups and figure out who to invest in, but also sales teams that wanted to figure out what are the fastest growing startups so I can sell stuff to them like really expensive BI packages. So what this is basically saying, what is like the growth of our seats, the number of people buying our product who are finance versus people in this sort of sales, BD, marketing, growth area. And really quickly, actually, if you can kind of see the box lines, you can see that we actually had like different behaviors across those two entities where for the finance users, we really wanted to focus on growth. Like the churn numbers were really low, so it's really more about how do we get more in the funnel. For sales, marketing, and BD, the churn was really high. The growth, if you average it, you can see there's one actually huge spike. So you're going from like 93 to 236 in, in 8 months. But the churn is really high. So you want to focus on different sort of product strategies for those two segments, right? For finance people, it's more about how do we get more functionality that get people in the door versus for salespeople, it became a little bit more about, how do we keep them engaged in the product? So the part where you combine it with behavioral data is then, you can see, okay, for all of our different parts of our product, how many people are using it and how much are they engaging, right? So this is just a small part of what was a huge like metrics sheet on like, we had a web product, we had a mobile app, we had a Chrome plugin, we had an Excel plugin, we had Google Sheets, and we had an API. And really understanding then for each of the different use cases, how does the engagement and usage differ? And the way that you do that is, so one of the best sources of data, anybody who works in B2B, is Salesforce. Like Salesforce has a ton of really useful data about, that's usually how you end up knowing who are these customers and what industry are they in and how big are they and how much money are they paying us. So one easy way to do that in Excel is Salesforce lets you run reports. So you set up your report, you export it, and then you can basically just build your spreadsheet in a way where you dump in the Salesforce data, you can combine it with data that you pull out of a database, and then you can roll it up to produce something like this, where this is a sample of Namely data where you can look at, hey, for every account, what industry are they in, how big are they, how satisfied are they? We have segmentation, like different breakdowns of different types of employees, how many international employees do they have, and so on. So almost over. So probably more time than you have ever spent hearing somebody tell you about Excel. Couple caveats. So as I mentioned, this is not meant to replace a BI tool for data-savvy organizations. Like you're still gonna need that. The CEO still needs sort of a nice graph to look at. The CEO is not gonna look at that freaking spreadsheet, right? It does require a commitment to becoming an Excel nerd like me to fully use this tool chain. So, think about whether that's a life that you wanna live. And also, very important, being data-driven is obviously not the only important product skill. So, you'll probably still have to know how to do some other stuff to be a good PM as well. So that is it, my plug. So we're hiring designers and product people and engineers at Namely. So if you want to know more about that, we have a careers page or come talk to me after.
Bryan, thank you. We got a question, but I wanted to ask one. So in the world of Namely, I think you're working with a product where the less time users spend in it, the better it's working.
Yep.
So how do you figure out what metrics to track? Like, what are the metrics that you watch to know if things are working well from a product standpoint?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So one of the things we're really trying to work on now is to basically improve satisfaction from our clients. NPS is a number that probably a lot of you guys are familiar with. But NPS has never been really satisfying to me because it's not something you can measure all the time, right? And I think it's really important for PMs, anybody doing product development, to have daily feedback on whether the things they're doing are making any difference in the way people are actually using your app in reality, right? So we actually try to boil it down to a set of metrics that we can track on a daily basis that we think are a proxy for client satisfaction. So one of the biggest ones that we've identified, for example, is just the percentage of clients in a given month or in a given day who open a support ticket with regards to payroll. And then if you think about that in client segmentation, we do know that there are whole segments of clients that are either more or less satisfied based on how big they are. I don't think I'm revealing any company secrets to say that like larger clients have more complex needs, so they generally are more demanding. We can actually even then look at like percentage of clients by segment that are actually reporting tickets at any given time. So that's an example of one of the ones we look at.
So I'm wondering if you've had a satisfactory experience somewhere in kind of the Goldilocks zone between we're a big company and we can afford to use a big BI platform and I'm just doing my own SQL queries in like SQL Pro or on the command line. Like, how do you actually get that visibility into that data for other people without having to do a big full-blown thing?
Yeah. So I think as you're starting to do this, you can go a long way. At Kabam, we started doing this when we were 50, 100 people. And I would say all the way up until like 400 or 500 people, we were probably mostly doing this. And honestly, I was just doing the analysis in Excel, screenshotting it and writing it up in emails and sending it to people, right? Usually when you get to about that series like C, D, mature, more mature phase, and it's a different. That was like back in 2011, so we had to go directly to let's make our own Hadoop cluster and start writing batch queries. Now I think it'd be more common at that Series C, 200-300 person phase to then invest in some kind of like Looker or like something like that where people who are not as data savvy can visualize. People who are doing the data analysis can use that to build reports that other people can see. And then beyond that, then it's just about whatever tool chain you're most comfortable in doing your own work. So for me, that's definitely SQL and Excel. I have some people on my team who are more comfortable using Tableau or, some of them like Python and they write their own thing. And, now I'm like, they're the young kids, the next generation. And just like I'm gonna be like the last person in the world using Excel on my PC. But, whatever works for you in terms of like being able to connect to the data and like, really refresh it every day.
Cool. And I had one more question for you. So you are now a VP of product. Can you talk a little bit about the first management role you had and how you got promoted into that role?
Oh man, the first management role I had. Okay, so the first management role I had was at the gaming startup I mentioned. It was called Kabam. Fun story, we actually pivoted like 3 times before building games, and we were apparently 2 or 3 months away from like not being able to make payroll when we were like, hey, let's make a game. So it can happen. So we made a game, and then we were about 30 people. And then we ended up growing from 30 people at the end of 1 year to 200 people the next year, and then 500 people the year after that. So it was sometime in that blur of like new faces and like suddenly being a real business that I became a manager. And it was more or less something along the lines of like, hey, suddenly we have all this money and we're gonna make 3 games now, and there's only about 50 people here, so why don't you manage this game? And by the way, here's this new person who works here. So yeah, I think like a lot of people got a big break, got really lucky, and yeah, I guess here I am.
Well, awesome. Congratulations, and thank you so much for joining us tonight.